Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this webinar about the Solicitors Qualifying Exam. This is one in a series of webinars we've been running, and also thank you for your patience. This one started slightly later than planned, so thank you for waiting. I'm Ben Fisher, I'm Head of External Communications here at the SRA, and I'm joined by Julie Brannan, who's our Director of Education and Training. And today we're going to be talking about qualifying work experience, or seeing as we like acronyms here, sometimes referred to as QWE. And this is a really interesting area in terms of changes that are happening in terms of when the SQE is going to be introduced, because there's some really interesting opportunities around QWE, qualifying work experience. But first off, I suppose it's worth establishing what is qualifying work experience.
So it's experience of working in legal services which gives a candidate the opportunity to develop the prescribed competencies for solicitors that we have set out in the Statement of Solicitor Competence. As viewers, I hope, can see on the slide, it must be at least 2 years long or full-time equivalent, but it need not be in one single setting, so it can be in up to 4 settings in different organisations or with different employers, provided that the totality adds up to the 2-year period.
And this qualifying work experience is one of the 4 pieces of the jigsaw that you need to put together, don't you, in order to qualify as a solicitor under the new SQE?
That's absolutely right. So the 4 requirements are that somebody should have a degree or equivalent qualification or experience, they need to pass SQE Parts 1 and 2, they need to complete the 2 years of qualifying work experience, QWE, and they need to demonstrate that they have the character and suitability to be a solicitor.
So you've described it's 2 years qualifying work experience, which isn't that different to the 2 years you need under the current sort of training contract arrangements if you qualify now. So how is QWE any different to a training contract?
Well, there are more options for people to meet the requirements for qualifying work experience. I guess the first thing to say is that we think that traditional training contracts will carry on and can carry on, but there are lots of other ways in which people will be able to demonstrate to us that they have had work experience which has enabled them to develop the competencies in the Statement of Solicitor Competence. So they may have worked as a paralegal, they may have had a year out in industry as part of a sandwich degree, they may be working as an apprentice, or indeed time spent in a student law clinic as part of a degree programme. All of those can count. And we know that part of the problem with training contracts at the moment is that people can be happily going along getting their academic qualifications and then get stuck because they can't find enough training contracts. We know that there are more people who want training contracts than there are training contracts available. So we hope that qualifying work experience will provide more opportunities for candidates, but actually more opportunities for firms too. There may well be firms out there at the moment who can't offer a training contract, perhaps because they haven't got the range of experience to offer, or perhaps because the costs are too great. Those firms might well find that employing somebody as a paralegal suits them very well, and that then creates an opportunity for an individual candidate to begin to gather their qualifying work experience too.
And some of the things you've talked about there, you've talked about people getting stuck at the moment, so they do the LPC perhaps, you can spend up to £16,000 on that, and then you're all set to want to try and train to become a solicitor, but you can't get a training contract. Under the new system, you wouldn't be paying upfront £16,000 likely on training, but also you can get sort of chunks of work experience as you go along.
As you're going along, that's absolutely right. So you might start off doing a law degree, and at the same time as doing your law degree, working in your student law clinic or volunteering under your own steam in legal services. That can all count. You can then perhaps take SQE1 at the end of your law degree, and armed with that qualification, see if you can get a period of qualifying work experience in practice. And then towards the end of your period of qualifying work experience, you might want to attempt SQE2. Then you can see you're beginning to assemble all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, so you can put in your application for admission as a solicitor.
And that not only presumably has the benefit that less people get stuck, but also you can perhaps earn as you learn, so to speak, as you go along. So it perhaps becomes more feasible to be able to qualify as a solicitor?
I think that's absolutely right. Lots of opportunity to fund your training through your earnings. We're all used at the moment to the fact that how do people fund the route to admission as a solicitor? Well, obviously through the student loan scheme, through the bank of mum and dad, so on and so forth. Sometimes the law firms sponsor them, but this really introduces another way of funding your route to admission. As you say, the cost of the SQE2 assessment in particular, you will be able to save up for as you are learning on the job during your qualifying work experience, and that provides another opportunity to get that qualification and get to admission.
And do you have to cover a certain amount of subjects or areas of law when you're doing that experience?
One of the big changes between the traditional training contract and qualifying work experience is that the traditional training contract used to talk about having a requirement for three practices of three areas of practice as a solicitor of law, as a trainee solicitor. The qualifying work experience is competence-based. So it's about developing the competences in the statement of solicitor competence, and it's that statement of solicitor competence that both law firms and candidates should refer to as they are gaining their qualifying work experience, to check that they are on track, that the experience is what they need to help to develop those competencies, so that by the time they get to admission they are competent and they are safe to practice. They have developed those competencies.
So if I, for instance, I was really interested in criminal law, say for instance, and I wanted to do all my work experience there, would that count, or would that be too narrow? What would I need to consider?
No, that would certainly count by way of qualifying work experience, provided you could show through that work experience how you are developing the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence, your client handling skills, your presentation skills, your writing skills, all the skills that we specify and set out in the statement of solicitor competence, then that would certainly count as qualifying work experience. I think what you would probably also want to do is be mindful of the assessments that we will be running as part of SQE2, which may well be broader, and think about how you might gain broader work experience as well, or broader exposure to different parts of the different areas of practice. But in terms of meeting the requirements for qualifying work experience, there is no requirement of a breadth of practice areas. It's just about developing those competencies.
And how many chunks of work experience can I do to add up to those 2 years?
So up to 4. There's no minimum time requirement for each of those 4. So we are aware that people who spend time in university law clinics, for example, may only accrue perhaps 6 weeks, 2 months work experience. That can count as one of your 4 experiences, but of course, though that's relatively short, what that does mean is that the rest of your 3 remaining work experience will have to be commensurately longer to add up to the total of 2 years.
And I know some people ask, are we going to set out more specific details around what counts as full-time or equivalent work experience over 2 years?
We're not going to specify a number of hours or a number of days. We think that people can form a grown-up professional judgment about what 2 years full-time equivalent means. Some people obviously may have time out from that. You may have a maternity leave, you may be ill, and the person signing off that work experience will just need to make a professional judgment about whether the odd day of cold here or there is not material, but a substantial amount of time out of the office, perhaps because of illness or because of a maternity leave, should extend the total period to make up the totality of 2 years, full-time equivalent in the office.
So you've mentioned signing off, and again, that's another area we get quite a few queries about, is who can sign off this qualifying work experience, and how does that actually work?
Yes, and I think if we move to the next slide now, we've put up some information about who can sign off qualifying work experience. The answer is that it can be the firm's compliance officer for legal practice, their COLP, if the organisation has one, or it can be a solicitor within the organisation, or it can also be a solicitor outside the organisation, provided they can meet additional safeguards, which is that they know either first-hand or from talking to the supervisor of the candidate, that the candidate has had that experience, good enough work experience to help them develop the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence. So they might want to talk to the seat supervisor, they might want to have a look at some of the work that the candidate has done, they might want to have a look at a learning log or a portfolio. They will need to satisfy themselves that that work experience really has happened.
And so if you were, from the candidate's perspective, if you are in 4 different places, because you could have qualifying work experience in four different chunks, would that mean you'd need 4 different people to sign them off?
Yes, it would. So you would expect them, a candidate to have 4 different sign-offs, because if they end up at firm D doesn't necessarily know what happened in firm A. So firm D, the signatory there can sign off the work experience that happened in that organisation, but the candidate will need to acquire the evidence from each of the places where they have worked that work experience took place.
So it's going to be really important for a candidate or someone who wants to be a solicitor, if they are a paralegal or they're doing some work, to identify who that person might be, to be signing that off pretty early doors, yeah?
I think that's absolutely right. It's helpful to have a good conversation, so to explain to your employer or the organisation that you're working in what your expectations and hopes are about the period of employment, that you would like to use it to support an application for admission as a solicitor and to demonstrate your qualifying work experience, to to find out who in the firm has responsibility for signing that off, to talk about what the procedures are in the firm around getting that signed off, and to make sure there's a clear understanding between both candidate and the employer about expectations on both sides.
And what exactly are they signing off? Because they're not signing off almost the quality of the candidate or the trainee, or whether they've met the standard. Am I right in thinking that?
You're absolutely right, and if we can move to the next slide, viewers can see what the requirements are in terms of signing off qualifying work experience. So viewers will be able to see that in essence the solicitor is signing off that the period of work experience has been completed. The period claimed for it might be the total of 2 years, but as we were talking about earlier, it might just be a period of 6 months or 6 weeks or however long it happens to be. They're signing off that period of time of qualifying work experience. They are confirming that the candidate has had the opportunity to develop the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence, some or all of them. We may not get all of them from one particular setting. And they're also confirming that no issues have arisen which raise any questions about the candidate's suitability or character to be a solicitor.
And so the real test then of whether people have met the standard is that SQE 1 and the SQE 2 assessment. That tests whether somebody, they've had the opportunity, but then can they put it into practice through the assessment? Yeah.
That's quite right, and it's a really important point that the sign-off of the period of qualifying work experience is not an assessment of competence. The solicitor who's signing off is not saying to us that this person is competent to practice as a solicitor. All they are saying is that they have had the opportunity to develop those competencies. And as you say, Ben, we will test whether they really are competent through the SQE assessment itself.
And is there any time limit on when people can start or complete that work experience? Does it have to be done within a certain period of time?
No time limit. People can begin to gather it now. We are developing an online portal through which people can upload documents and evidence around qualifying work experience, but that's not ready yet. What I would say to people, top tip to viewers, to law firms and candidates out there, do begin gathering your evidence now. So if you want to claim working as a paralegal or working in a student law clinic or whatever it is as an element of qualifying work experience, make sure that you talk to your employer, as we were discussing a moment ago. Make sure that they understand that you would like to use the work experience for that purpose. Find out whether there is somebody in the firm who can sign off, who can sign you off and confirm that the work experience has taken place, and think about gathering that evidence that makes clear what you have been doing, how long the period is that's claimed for, so that when the application process is developed, you've got the evidence and you can upload that onto the system and confirm to us the amount of qualifying work experience that you're claiming.
And does that experience have to be within England and Wales, or can you get it elsewhere?
Doesn't have to be within England and Wales. In fact, already we have training contracts that happen abroad, and similarly qualifying work experience can happen in England and Wales or in other countries. The key thing to remember though is that the sign-off has to be by a solicitor of England and Wales. So you have to be working under the supervision of somebody who can sign off for you, who is a solicitor of England and Wales.
So it's more likely to be in a firm that has an international or some sort of operation, probably spreading out to England and Wales, unless there happens to be a solicitor working there who is qualified here.
That's right. So I think we do expect that it's likely to be in global practices who have offices around the world, including in England and Wales, and they employ English and Welsh solicitors. But if you can find somebody who can genuinely make a declaration to us that they know what you have been doing, and that they've got evidence of it, they've seen the work that you have been doing, they've spoken to your seat supervisor, they can sign off that you have had the opportunity to develop the competencies we specify in order to be admitted as a solicitor of England and Wales, then that is another way through.
And I suppose some people might be thinking, listening to this, oh well, I'm interested in the SQE in terms of qualifying, and I got a load of experience a couple of years ago in a firm. Can I get that sort of signed off retrospectively? How would that work for somebody?
So in theory you can. There is no time limit. You will need to go back to the organisation, you will need to talk to them to explain what it is that you want to do with that qualifying work experience. You will have to ask them to check back in their records. They should have a record of how long you worked there. You will want to talk to somebody who you worked alongside so they can speak to the sort of work that you were doing. So in theory there's no regulatory barrier to that, but you will need to think about getting the evidence to support your
It might be a bit more knotty, for instance, if the person who supervised you there had moved
left,
on or something
yes,
else like that.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's also worth just adding that of course the sign-off is an important regulatory declaration to us. The person who is making that declaration, who's signing off qualifying work experience, is going to need to be clear that they can honestly declare to us that in the case of the person, they know that they have done the period of time claimed for, that they did have the opportunity to develop the competencies, and that there are no character and suitability issues that arose. So that is an important declaration, and the person making that declaration to us will need to know that either first-hand from their own personal knowledge, or perhaps in a large organisation because they know the systems and procedures and checks in that organisation that have happened, and so they know what work will have happened, and they've seen the evidence of the systems that enable them to sign off the QWE.
And do you think it could cause problems at some point? I mean, for instance, what if a solicitor's refusing to sign off a trainee's experience? What would happen then?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that if a solicitor does not think that it's appropriate to claim for qualifying work experience, then they should not sign off the period claimed for. This is an important regulatory declaration to us as regulator, and we will expect the solicitor only to sign off where they are clear and confident that the period claimed for is right.
So if I was a paralegal doing quite a lot of, for want of better, administration work, which didn't actually, achieve what's set out in the competence statement, then someone can, in good faith, sign off that as...
If you spent 6 months doing pagination and proofreading, that does not look like developing competencies that you need for practice as a solicitor. I think that's quite right. On the other hand, a solicitor is also subject to a duty not to take unfair advantage of clients or other third parties, and clearly acting in bad faith in refusing to sign off somebody's qualifying work experience would not be in line with that professional obligation.
And we'd probably anticipate those type of disputes or tensions might be fairly rare, but they could happen, and I suppose they could still happen in the current system actually.
They absolutely can, and we certainly do hope and expect that they will be rare. And I think some of the things that we were talking about earlier about having good conversations in the workplace with the HR department, with your supervisor, with the compliance officer for legal practice, with your employer, about what you are hoping for, what they are hoping for, what your expectations are, if there are any difficulties, anticipating those and thinking about how to resolve them earlier. Those sorts of conversations, real conversations about making clear everybody is working in the same direction and any difficulties or problems have been addressed. That's the real way to avoid problems happening at the last moment when you come to sign off. Think about it early. Ask your employer about whether they are prepared to support you, even at interview stage when you're thinking about applying for this job. What is it that the employer is expecting out of this role? Is it a training role? If it's not a training role, it's just a paralegaling role. Is it something that the employer nevertheless thinks could count as qualifying work experience? Check it out when you're applying for the job, when you're being interviewed, and continue to talk to your employer about it during the period of qualifying work experience.
So we've touched on some sort of tips for candidates or tips for people who might want to go down this route. I was wondering whether we could perhaps just summarise some of those. Although I suppose it's worth adding the caveat, of course, is that if you're wanting to be a solicitor now, you may be partway through the journey to qualifying under the current system, and actually you may not want to choose the option of going down the SQE route. But if you do, and so qualifying work experience comes into play, what would your tips be for people?
My top tip would be take advantage of the new flexibilities. Recognise that there is less risk of you getting stuck just because you can't get a training contract. So you will be able to go out and cast your net far more widely to get wider sorts of experience that can still count. Think about the ultimate demands of the SQE2 assessment, which will be an assessment looking at the full range of your skills, and try to get work experience which prepares you as well as possible for the SQE2 assessment. So do take advantages of that. Have a look at materials on our website. Have a look at the Statement of Solicitor Competence if you haven't already done so. Have a look at what the competencies are that we say all solicitors need to be able to demonstrate. And that should guide you in terms of, within your role, trying to get the best experience you can to help you develop those competencies.
You also, I presume, might want to start thinking, particularly if you're 16 years old and thinking about university, there might be the potential for universities to offer work experiences.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. When you're thinking about applications to universities, find out whether the universities that you're interested in have their own student law clinic. Find out if they've got good relationships with local firms so that they're able to bring the solicitors in, you can get an insight about what it means to practice as a solicitor, but there may also be job opportunities and work opportunities there too. Find out if they run a sandwich degree which offers you a placement in industry as part of your degree. Do talk about the extent to which you can pick up work experience at the same time as learning the law. It's a good idea anyway because it will give you an insight about whether working as a solicitor is really for you, and it's very helpful for you to have really got an inside feeling about that before you launch off going down potentially expensive further training and assessment and so on. So do think about that.
And a year in business in any type of job is not going to be a year wasted in terms of if you end up wanting to work in another sector, but also if it confirms that actually, the law is for me, that's good to know when you're then putting down more money in terms of the future training.
And it's good to know that is one year of your 2-year period of qualifying work experience that you've already got under your belt.
So, looking at the law firm perspective, what would be your tips for them?
For law firms to also think about how you can take advantage of the new opportunities, the new options that are open to you. There are going to be wider recruitment pathways, recruitment as a paralegal, as an apprentice, as a trainee, so wider recruitment options and different more flexibilities in terms of training options too. Think about how those align with your business objectives, and think about whether the new routes into the profession mean that you can spread your net wider to find out, to identify the wider talent that's out there and bring on more talented people into your organisation. So
just the last couple of questions. What does good qualifying work experience look like?
Well, in terms of the what, it's work experience which is aligned to the statement of solicitor competence, and I think goes back to what we were talking about a moment ago. So it means it supports somebody in developing those competencies that we will then be assessing through the SQE2, particularly the skills we'll assess through the SQE2 assessment. In terms of the how, it's getting work experience where you have the opportunity for more experienced professionals to input, to give you feedback, to tell you how you can improve, to tell you what what were the strengths of what you did, but how then you can develop your work further. So through the normal sorts of appraisals and routine one-to-ones, and getting somebody to look over your work, give you tips, learning from observing more experienced people too. So that cycle of observing an experienced professional, then you having a bash yourself and getting them to give you input and feedback on how you did, and learning through lots of repetition and lots of practice of the tasks that a solicitor normally does.
And I presume you'll want an eye on SQE2 and what's required there, because ultimately you want to get the right skills, practical skills that mean you're well set to pass SQE2.
That's absolutely right. We're still developing SQE2. We've got a pilot for SQE2 which will be running in December, and we're publishing shortly an assessment specification for the pilot, which will give a first indication of the sorts of tasks that we will be setting through SQE2. But keep an eye on that as it's developed, and make sure, exactly as Ben says, that the competencies that you're developing are aligned with the statement of solicitor competence and the assessments that you will go through as part of SQE2.
So we've covered an awful lot of ground there. Thank you for those of you who have stuck with us for that. But obviously people will want to take that in and find out more information. Where should people go to find out more information about this?
We've got a toolkit of resources on the SQE website, on the SRA website, I beg your pardon, about the SQE. So please have a look there. We've got resources for firms and resources for candidates. We've got some resources explaining qualifying work experience, but we want to build and develop those. And we plan to have more resources published probably in the new year, in spring 2020. So please do, if you've got any ideas or suggestions of things that you would like us to add to our resources, any extra information that you would find helpful, please let us know. And the best way to do that is to email us at sqe@sra.org.uk. So let me repeat that again. The email address is sqe@sra.org.uk.
And I suppose I should give a final shout out. If you're an aspiring solicitor, we also have the Career in Law Facebook page. You can find that on Facebook. We've got a good following on there, and that's very much targeted at someone who might be considering a career in law, and some bite-sized bits of information to help you make your decisions and understand what's needed. Also, if you've got a question, put your question in the comments or send it in directly and we'll answer it on there. But otherwise, I think that's that qualifying work experience covered. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll let you know when we do another one of these soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.